welcome back to I Don't Know, a podcast where I guess in real time, actively demonstrate my ignorance in various forms. I think this particular episode stands to exemplify the concept underlying in a way that the previous two episodes have maybe not quite demonstrated, by giving the appearance that my thoughts might be flowing smoothly and predictably and easily in the previous two episodes. This one is feeling more of a challenge. First off, I'm recording a few days after I intended. I wanted to kind of get on it. Middle of the week was my idea, my ideal goal for this project, to just establish some pattern of regularity. I had some other work come up that was had a higher priority, so I had to put that first, and that kind of took out the time that would be necessary for sitting down and hitting record and exploring these ideas. That's not to say that the ideas weren't coming. So this week leading up to it, I've been trying to establish some sort of concept going in that or a few ideas or thoughts over the week that might be worth exploring and having those kind of at the ready. And what I'm finding is that some of it is about the headspace that I'm in. And it stands, I think it stands to reason that today I'm not in a headspace that I would think is conducive, but this kind of maps onto some of also another thing that I've touched on before in previous episodes of the bkwalaBEATS project. There are days that I wasn't, on it, and if I hadn't set that standard of releasing that, making that, putting it out every day, that I probably wouldn't have done it at all. I would have given that as an excuse to eject myself from that, not run that program that day. But given the circumstances and the parameters that I set, to do that every day, a few exceptions. I've talked about how the perspective that comes from doing something, even if I don't connect with it when it's being created and released and published, even if I don't connect with it that day or during its inception, doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad. It might feel bad. I might equate that feeling of not feeling connected to it in the moment. I might equate that to a value judgment on the work itself. But counterintuitively to that, I've found with the beats, a lot of them listening back after, however long, that the quality standards, or whatever that is, it's definitely relative, because listening back to certain things, I could, point out and be like, oh, I have these memories that are attached to this beat. So when I hear it, it pulls me back to, oh, I remember actually that day being like a particularly difficult day, or like that day being, a kind of pivot point from a series of a few bad days that built up onto themselves and this beat, I definitely like wasn't connected to it at the time, but it represents some documentation of the headspace that I was in. And there's something really valuable there. And that's kind of just shifting the dimensionality of how you're viewing something, and by being on top of it and being kind of in a sense feeling like you're forcing something, which is what I feel like I'm doing right now. It's very easy to translate the discomfort in the moment, in the present, to translate that into, or equate that with, the quality of whatever this is being bad. I think to the extent that whatever process that you're iterating, to the extent that you've run that process enough and there's comfort there, I think you can build up a good amount of tolerance to cover for yourself, so to speak. And with the like Beats project, early on, especially the momentum shifts were harder to manage. And I think definitely within the first 6 months, I definitely missed a few days. There was like a 10-day period during a meditation retreat that I missed entirely, but that was kind of part of it, or that was intended or known going in. But then I definitely gave myself a few days off when I was feeling overwhelmed, and I think it was healthy to do that. It also, I didn't want to let that be enough to form a new habit there. There's something that about the project that to me, what the challenging aspect was overcoming that and finding a way to do it anyway. And yeah, I've already gotten into it in terms of like shifting the standards or expanding. And at first, the less I had done of the Beats project, the harder it was to trust that, doing it was going to result in something of a quality that I was comfortable with. Because I didn't necessarily trust myself to connect, or I think I didn't trust myself enough to recognize that just because I'm not connected to a creative frequency at any given point in time doesn't mean that the work will necessarily suffer in terms of whatever the hell quality is. And again, that comes from building up the pattern of a particular process. And I would say on the back half of the year, I can't remember the last time I took a day off, at least intentionally. There have been a few days where I made the beat and just forgot to publish it. Oddly enough, the few cases where that's happened, those were beats that I think I felt particularly connected to. Almost like to illustrate the point that the other extreme is still also a dangerous spot to take. So going so far in one direction that I was feeling it so much that I actually forgot to finish out part of the process on the back end. So that was interesting, but I guess it's much more difficult. when the process is not something familiar or within a familiar paradigm. And making the beats, I'm familiar with the Oxy beat making app. I've been using that for years now, and so there's a familiarity with the tool. There's a 2 decades long music background, in I guess sort of a pseudo formal quality, just in terms of engaging with it intentionally. And even, I'm saying that because I feel like there was musical inclination throughout my life in various forms. But I didn't officially pick up an instrument and start legitimately attempting to learn it until 13. So there's backlogs of 2 decades plus of shedding, of putting in the time that is a safety net, that is a like a comfort blanket for jumping out or going out on a limb with a new project. So with the beats, I at least it's not like I was going in with a complete blank slate. So whereas here, this is what's going to be the third episode of I Don't Know, and I would say the first two came out a bit more like smoothly than I anticipated them, or I was a little bit pleasantly surprised at how they turned out, and how they felt, I guess, during the process. It didn't feel entirely discomforting. So, it's bound to strike at any point in time. So, might as well be now. Where, yeah, it's just, I'm feeling in a headspace that is not the most conducive to tuning in a frequency and staying locked into it. I think I'm becoming, the more I'm becoming aware of that, it's making it all the more enticing to kind of lunge out and take a stab at it. And that seems to be, I feel like I'm jumping and leaping at it at like just a split second too soon. So there's this feeling of like chasing something, that, yeah, I guess in certain headspaces, it's hard to do, because I think part of this process and this practice, which in this case, as opposed to my experience with music, this talking out loud to a camera is less familiar. So the doubt and the imposter syndrome kind of feelings are much more prevalent. And so hitting the wall, so to speak, it feels more, I have less of a safety net here, I guess. I've put in 2 episodes, and that's helpful to the extent that it can be. But again, like knowing that something like this is around the corner at any point in time, and for the sake of continuing the process and establishing some amount of consistency, this is just bound to be part of that. So yeah, I guess I'll just exemplify that in real time. Yeah, I was kind of playing around with just the idea of automation and how it emerges, or like what sort of situation it emerges into, and just in a general sense recognizing that the that our ability to kind of shape our mindsets going into a particular situation, we have some flexibility there, whether it's intentional or just as a result of the circumstances. It doesn't really matter, but it, I guess there is just kind of a recognition that in two distinct situations, the way I choose to organize my mindset or my frame of mind stands to be different in each of those situations, based on hopefully the most useful configuration for a situation. So I guess that's really all to say that there is some malleability there. I also kind of like to picture like the eye examination, where if you have to have corrective lenses, you have to check, like they flip through multiple options two at a time in pairings, and it's, which looks more clear, like one or two, three or four, and sometimes it's the distinction is worlds away and obvious, and other times it's the two look almost exactly the same, but that mechanism of flipping lenses or adding different ones in different combinations to determine the prescription is, I think that highlights, or that illustrates the way I'm viewing like our mindset, our biases, our skills, like serving as kind of like a filter or a lens that we we might aim more towards, valuing honesty or truth or, doubt or fear, happiness, pleasure, all of these things. I guess they might all be active in some form or another, but there is bound to be a hierarchy of how you lay those out in an attempt to be strategic about how you are approaching the situation you find yourself in. And kind of jumping analogy again, like the idea of picking up a guitar, the configuration of my skills in my head when I have a guitar in my hand is much different than the configuration of skills when I pick up a book and intend to read, which is very different from when I sit down in front of a camera and plan to talk, which is different than when I'm going for a walk outside, which is different when I'm making love, which is different when, I'm putting together graphic design. Like there's overlap, and there's patterns that emerge in those processes that seem to be in common throughout all of those, and those, I assume, are qualities of myself that are being injected into these different processes. But it's the distinctions that I think are what we can use to prioritize putting one set of values or one configuration in place of another, if we believe it to be more useful in a given situation. I think, all of that essentially was just to set up that there's some amount of malleability and flexibility there in terms of shuffling things around, that we have on hand to fit the situation. And I keep getting lost right here of making the jump to the automation idea. Yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe it's just still not there. There's more fleshing out. So to jumping analogies with where I'm playing guitar, whatever that configuration can be, if I repeat the practice of playing guitar, picking it up and playing it an hour a day, which I'm not doing, just full disclosure, but I have at times, and yeah, okay, well let's do one that's more familiar. The Beats project, picking up, having the phone as a tool, almost always on hand, and a music production tool that's built in, that I'm familiar with, that I'm comfortable with, and setting the challenge for myself for a daily practice where I do something and I'm accountable by virtue of building the daily publishing as a parameter into that project. So committing to that practice at a high rate of frequency, once every day, essentially. It's committing to stepping into occupying a certain headspace, well, no. Okay, so I would say it's a commitment to occupying a certain chunk of attention to a project, to the aim of the goal, which is to produce a beat and publish it. So committing to setting aside time to do that, whatever my headspace is during that time. And the effect there is that I generate an expression, an artistic expression of that headspace at that time. So whatever configuration of the mental facilities that I have, whatever configuration of the mental facilities I have on tap that is present during the process that day is somehow mapped onto the beat that I created. And so that's the recording of it, and the publication of it is, again, a mechanism to hold myself accountable, which, like I said before, would probably have been, there were plenty here, and I could probably stand to go back through, and as I've got one more day left, tomorrow, Saturday, January 30th, will be the final beat of the yearly thing, or the year-long process. So I'm sure as I wrap it up, I already do this a little bit every once in a while, but listening back to all of them, I would be interested, and I'll probably do this in some form or another, exploring, if I listen back to them, if how much of the memories from the time that the beats were created is mapped onto and baked in to the beat itself. How much do I recall of what I was feeling? I don't know. It'd be interesting just in terms of like writing music and I would say in general, when the configuration of my skills, when I step into what I consider creative, like music making, the goal that I have of music making, the configuration tends to overvalue, I think, demonstrating technical ability, or prioritizing something that's maybe more complicated than it always needs to be. And just, I think partly I'm recognizing that there's more to convey. And this might be where the automation kicks in. So as, you know, so far my career as a musician has been largely influenced by my configuration of prioritizing complications or complicated material that demonstrates some amount of um, technical prowess. That technique has equated to value historically for me, and that's been no value to that, but it's been good at times, but it's also served as a really high bar that has essentially been a very deep and wide moat keeping me out of the castle when I wasn't up for crossing it. And so the daily practice aspect of it and the just forcing myself to post it made that moat much smaller. And I think because I was holding on to the idea that if it was complicated, it was better, and therefore the inverse of that being if it's simple, if it's then it's worse. It's somehow lesser than, and having the idea that on certain days where I'm not fully connected to that creative, I haven't the configuration of my internal tools and skills is not tuning in a very like high quality, high resolution signal. And so there's an element of just like forcing the work out. And yeah, I think a lot of that caused me to, I think, question the quality of it because it came out simpler, or I guess making the assumption that because I didn't connect to it, maybe I didn't put as much into it, or maybe I didn't maybe I didn't it didn't require all of my capacity, and was therefore like undervalued to me. And as I've touched on, listening back to them after some time away tends to indicate to me that I'm wrong there. That there is still value in having run that process, and the value I'm able to recognize that by shifting the maybe long-term objective, or just expanding the objective as a musician to maybe a broader, more storytelling idea or vibe, or just recognizing that the contours of the information that I documented on the days that I wasn't feeling connected to something might be a very good representation if I wanted to tell a story about not connecting to something, and try to express that state of disconnectedness that there's a place for those types of expressions that I seem to be kind of tuning out up until this project opened up for me. So I'm applying that here because this podcast is still a medium that I'm new to. And I guess, the hope is that by sticking to the consistent nature of it, the familiarity and the comfort level in doing it, that repetition will reinforce the practice. And I understand that, the insight or the content maybe isn't always the words themselves or the message that's being conveyed superficially. But having documented this, knowing that I'm maybe not as organized mentally. I don't have the configuration right now that's allowing me to really inhabit the flow of it and feeling a little bit more scrambled. There's value in having that documented. And the insight is less about what's coming out at a certain extent, and the value is to be discovered within that, understanding that the context within which I'm recording this right now is one where I'm not connecting with it as much as I would maybe like to be. And being okay with that, because that's, again, I'm importing a lesson from a different project that was iterative in nature. And again, like, assuming that that's coming from some basic principle, I would have to imagine that the same will be true here, that over time, this is going to mean less by virtue of being a smaller and smaller percentage of the work that I've come up with and published. But the layers of the context that I'm recording this from will also be in here. They'll be captured in this documentation. And that might feel clumsy, and it does feel clumsy. But that no longer is sufficient to keep me from doing it, I guess. And I counterintuitively want to be rewarded for recognizing that. I have this thought of, it's like, for recognizing this, it should make it easier or make the scrambledness go away. But that isn't the case. It's, I'm still just opening my mouth and letting words come out. I don't feel entirely, like I said, inhabited in whatever this perspective is that I'm trying to communicate. And it's, I don't know. I'm like, my intuition is to apologize, but it's also, I'm not forcing anyone to do this or to listen to it. I'm not subjecting anyone to it. If that's how you feel, I'm sorry. But ultimately, I guess there's an extent to which this is motivated by a purely inward facing need to explore. And that, I don't know, there is something connected to the ego there. There's something, I don't know if narcissistic is right. I like, there's got to be some level of narcissism attached to, deciding that my thoughts are worthy of being shared to begin with. And I think that comes easier to a lot of people. This also might map onto the configuration of values that within my musical endeavors leads me to value and only and set such a high bar for myself that I end up not sharing that much. And I don't know. I think there's something beneficial to creating some structure that maintains your capacities moving forward, over time. You don't want to burn out, but you also don't want to obscure yourself by never putting anything out. And for me, one of the biggest boundaries or barriers there has been always having this perpetually shifting standard for what the bar is. And I touched on that last week. Dan from Louisville, first audience participation of the I Don't Know podcast. Again, thanks. It's been stuck in my head, and just thinking about that and how it's very hard to establish a consistent bar. But it is important to consistently establish a bar. And those are not the same thing. Like I can't point to exactly what it is at any given point in time, because based on whatever the project is, the goal of that project or that step to a project, however you break it down, should be determined. If you can't lay out what the goal is, it's going to be very hard to reach a point in that project that feels like you've accomplished what you've set out to, if you don't know ahead of time what you're setting out to do. And here I am on a podcast called I Don't Know, that is very upfront about dealing with the unknown and doubt and ignorance, all of the things that we don't know, and reckoning with that. And I think, why am I surprised that I'm reaching out for something and there's nothing there? I think it's bound to happen. Like I said, I know that to be true, and I recognize the value. I'm I guess taking some amount of faith in the transference of the lesson from the beats that I made on days that I wasn't feeling it or feeling connected, that there's still quality to be found in the documentation of those and sticking to the process. So I'm hopeful, and I'm maintaining faith that same principle applies here as well. I feel like the safety net is much thinner and less reassuring here, because I've done less of this, and so it feels more precarious. And yet at the same time, the more I can put faith in the lesson from the beats overlapping and holding true here as well, that I just got to get through this. It might not be the best, but it's not the end of the world. I'm going to do it. That means episode 3 is in the wraps, and I can move on. And, hopefully the configuration of my headspace the next time matches up with a better timing that I can sit down and do this. And I'm able to, fully catch on, or, that it gives me the opportunity moving forward to let go of this as this currently feels like a subpar talk or, episode, whatever this is. This feels, in this moment right now that I'm recording it, it feels bad, or it feels subpar. It feels not optimal. But there's something about just accepting it and understanding and exploring that at the same time, because again, that's what I'm somehow attempting to do, or for some reason attempting to do. Jury's still out whether it's compelling or interesting at all. Um, but I can only hope that by continuing to do it and having the same, not not allowing the disconnected feeling on a particular day like today, not letting that overwhelm and kind of hijack the consistency of the project. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's enough said there. I don't think I really brought in the automation at all, but I'll try to explore that a different time. I think essentially the idea was like for something that you're comfortable with, if if the more you get familiar with it, the more likely some amount of automation will emerge, and that automation um, essentially frees up some of your like processing resources to put to something else. It it comes. You can think of it in terms of like efficiency. If there's something that once required all of your attention and focus, by repeating that X number of times, whatever that may be, you effectively learn some amount of efficiency, some shortcuts, or some ways to condense patterns and concepts and make connections within that requires a little bit less of your resources to run that process. And so you can say, if a certain process you can chip away, and through that automation emerging, you can chip off like 3% of your processing power during a thing. So for me, making music or whatever, if I level up to a certain extent, I stand to have a little bit of a gap once I can automate some of that. Once the automation emerges. And I guess one way of looking at the gap is like a deficiency, or something that I'm not fully utilizing what my capacity is. So I have to put something in that gap, or I can just stay operating at a lower level. There's benefits to that, like resting or any of that. But I think over time, that's how the boredom kind of sneaks in to an automated process. And one way of staving that off, or at least pushing beyond, is to find ways to come up with something to add in to make up that difference. Like put 3% of attention or focus towards something else, either within that practice, or allot it to a different practice altogether. There's, I guess that's the thing I was thinking about earlier, and have kind of hopped on trying to kind of jump in to that thought. But I think I'll just plant that seed and come back to it whenever hopefully it'll kind of stick a little bit more. But yeah, I guess just the takeaway there, and something to think about, is just we are in charge of what we do with that extra capacity that we build for ourselves, or that we, the repetition will increase the likelihood that automation sets in. And once that happens, and our resource, the cost to us to run that program lowers, it gives us a little bit more flexibility to put our resources into something else. And that can lead to like deeper paths within that field. Like instead of just playing guitar. There's, writing music. And the more I understand or inhabit each of those separately, I can try to explore each for what they have to offer, I guess, or what they have on tap. And it's, I don't know. I think up until this time, or until fairly recently, I've wanted to. I think I've aspired to try to shift and expand into creating something that uses my musicianship as a tool, as opposed to as a means to showing the musicianship for itself. I think there's space for both, but the compulsion to do something more with that, I think, comes through the efficiency that builds up over time of practicing something. And so I think with the beats as well, recognizing that the documentation of those off day beats seems to express some of that, the contours of the mindset that I inhabited at the time of making it, that opens up a whole new realm to explore with telling a story using music or any means. And so yeah, I don't know, it opens up the landscape that I have on tap to explore as a storyteller or a artist in whatever capacity. And so that comes about through that automation and being a little bit intentional, or a lot of bit intentional, with what I focus that new overhead that the automation allows for. It finds efficiencies within the process and uses the what's now a surplus to get you back up to fulfill your I guess, I don't know. It allows you, if you fill that gap with something that genuinely compels you, or you find a way to add a bit more resolution to the project, or go a little bit deeper, or explore a little bit, maybe a tangential thing that relates. I guess essentially, choosing to actively determine what you do, how you spend your mental resources, and recognizing when you have more to give, and taking ownership of kind of crafting how that looks moving forward, or how that shapes up, I think is a very important choice that we have to make. We can also, fill that space with just rest, which is much needed, and largely undervalued, but we also can, you can lean too heavily into, you can try to fill every time you automate through repetition and you get more familiar with something. If over time, each time you have a little bit of room to add, you're adding something unrelated, it maybe stands to set you up for being like a jack of all trades, master of none sort of thing. Whereas you can also choose to fill that gap with looking further into the same thing, which has its benefits as well. There's I don't know. I think just recognizing that we can take it in either direction. You can invest further into the practice of what you're doing, or find ways to continue looking in the same area but with different perspectives, or like mental configurations, again, to bring that back. Like, you can do that. You can also use that extra capacity and put your attention and focus towards things that are unrelated but also expansive and growth minded. Or you can basically just settle for it. Settle for operating at 97%, or once that automation kicks in, you can find other ways that attention and focus should go towards. I think there's something about just recognizing the capacity that you create for yourself through automation, which happens more often within the likelihood that some form of automation occurs is the likelihood goes up whenever you're doing something repetitive in nature, and you commit to that process as a regular practice, because you're establishing something familiar that is you're able to reference over time, and then your mindset in that moment becomes the variable. You're essentially kind of trying your best to rule out or to make the practice another constant in a state of variables. So the more familiar something is, the more you can use it as a reference point, or as And just like that, I've lost that train. So I guess we're about that time anyway. So thanks for bearing with me on this one. It's been a little weird, like I said. Hopefully I'll find a much bigger wave next time around, or just the timing, the stars will align a little bit better. But hopefully there's something of value here. We'll see. I'll maybe circle back around to it at some point as an example moving forward. So thanks again for tuning in. I'm Gabe Garber. I still don't know, as evidenced by the last 45 minutes to an hour. Thanks for tuning in.